Hello and welcome to the second episode of Usefull Redstone. Today I'll show you some Shulker Unloaders at single, double and 4 times hopper speed. As always, if you want to see more of me, just follow me over on Twitch, the link is in the description. I built a double hopper speed unloader here in my single player world near a digging project to save as many of the resources as possible, because I am a hoarder. I can't just leave items despawning. So, I have a shulker box here full of stone and other materials. I throw it in here, it goes into the unloader and all the items get dropped into this sorter here. Now before I show you how these work and how to make these, I want to explain a very basic redstone principle, which I realized is very confusing to many people that are new to redstone or just unexperienced with it. And that is that an observer can detect if a redstone component is powered and unpowered. For example, this dropper here, or any of these redstone components in this line work the same way. When you power them, it detects it, and when you unpower them, it detects it. And that is a very useful way of transferring a signal. For a single hopper speed unloader, it is quite simple. Once the shulker goes in here, this comparator will detect an item coming through this hopper, activating the dropper, updating this observer and dispensing the shulker box, which will then be unloaded by this chain of hoppers, and as long as there's items coming through this hopper, this observer clock will be active and tick away on this dropper, which will all drop the items into what I will be assuming is a water stream here. Once there's no more items coming through, meaning the shulker that is dispensed here is empty, it will send a signal both to this hopper and to the piston at the same time, making it so this hopper is powered while the piston is breaking the shulker box, so the shulker box ends up in this separate hopper here. Then the signal continues up, once again powering this dropper and dispensing the next shulker box. And as you can see, the empty shulker is right here, and the items all end up down there. This design is also tileable, so if you need more than 4 times hopper speed, I would suggest just tiling these one next to each other in as many as you need, and just distributing the shulkers evenly across them by maybe something like a minecart. Since a single hopper is quite slow and can be a real bottleneck, you will have to use a minecart to speed that up and then have the minecart distribute those items across multiple hoppers. However, now if you break the shulker box, the minecart immediately picks that up. So the solution I found for that is to move the minecart out of the way using honey blocks, then breaking the shulker box, dropping it into a separate hopper line, and then moving the minecart back into place for the next shulker to be emptied. And the empty shulkers once again end up in this separate hopper line. Now if you want to go with the 4 times hopper speed, there's only 2 more changes to it. One being that the minecart that gets moved out of the way further distributes it to a second minecart that then goes onto 4 hoppers. And the second change being 2 droppers instead of 1 to keep up with 4 different hoppers. If you want to build one of these, there's the resources on screen right now, so you can follow along with the block by block tutorial. To show you how to build these, I will be using the water stream where you will have your items go as a reference point. So we start with the single hopper speed unloader. You place a building block next to the railing of your water stream and a dropper pointing downwards. From here you take 3 hoppers going up in a straight line. Now you take a comparator, reading the signal from the lowest of those hoppers. Place a temporary block here and a block on top of it and below of it. Here you place a torch on the other side of the block with the comparator pointing into it, remove the temporary block, and put a repeater pointing into that block with the comparator on top. Now you place another temporary block on the lowest block here, placing an observer that points its signal into that repeater. Turn around and place an observer pointing in the opposite direction. Now you can remove that temporary block again, and you place a sticky piston pointing downwards on the far side of the redstone torch, so in a way that it grabs the lower observer. From here you take another observer pointing upwards from that sticky piston, and you take another sticky piston going towards the hopper line here. Here you place a temporary block at the piston head, an observer pointing towards the hopper line, and a building block next to the top hopper. Next you place the piston on top of that block. You put a temporary block next to that middle hopper and a hopper pointing downwards on top of it. This will be where your empty shulkers will end up in, so you can just put this hopper line wherever you need it to go. Now you can remove the temporary block again. Next you take an observer and put it on top of this temporary block pointing upwards into a building block. Next to that building block you place a dropper. In this case it doesn't matter in which direction it's facing, it's just there to carry on the signal. Now an observer on top of that piston, pointing the same direction as the piston. And at the observer you place a dispenser facing downwards, which will be placing the shulkers in front of that piston. Now you need the hoppers that give the shulker box into the dispenser, so one pointing in the dispenser and the second one going in that hopper. Now you place a comparator on top of that observer pointing towards this dropper. Now you just remove this temporary block and the unloader is done. Next I'll show you the double hopper speed unloader, again using the water stream as a reference point. So you place a building block right here and a dropper facing downwards. Now a hopper on top and one hopper going into it from the side with another one on top. Now you place a comparator reading the signal from that hopper. Place a temporary block next to the building block we first placed with a block on top and one next to it and one block below the temporary block. Now you can remove it again. Next up, a repeater pointing into that block that powers the dropper. Here you place another temporary block and an observer sending its signal to the repeater. Go to the other side and place an observer in the opposite direction, one block below. Now you can once again remove the temporary block. Next you place a redstone torch on the block in which the comparator is facing into, and again sticky piston on the far side of that torch so it grabs that lower observer. Next you place a dropper facing upwards at the second block we placed here, right next to the torch, and a hopper pointing down into it. Now don't forget to put one single item, whatever item you want, into that dropper here, and a comparator reading the signal from that top hopper. Next up I will show you how to place the minecart. So you place 2 honey blocks on top of those 2 hoppers, and since you can't place any rails on top of honey, you will need 2 temporary blocks on top. You come out by a third and up by 2. The way you position the minecart is by placing a glass pane here and a rail going sideways like so, placing a Hopper Minecart on top, and then you push that Hopper Minecart all the way into that glass pane. Now you break the rail and the glass pane, and then break the 2 temporary blocks below so the minecart drops on top of the honey blocks. Make sure you don't touch the minecart anymore so it stays exactly as it is aligned right here. Don't worry if it's twisting and turning sometimes, that doesn't really change its position, it just seems like it. Now you place 2 glass blocks on top and pistons facing downwards, so you can push those glass blocks into the minecart. Now you can remove the pistons and the temporary blocks. Now the minecart is secured in place and can distribute the items to the two hoppers equally. After positioning the minecart, you will place two temporary blocks here in front of that comparator like so. You come up front and place a sticky piston, grabbing the right one of the two honey blocks. And now you place a building block in front of that comparator so it can power the sticky piston we just placed. Now just remove those two temporary blocks. After that you come up top here, place a piston like so on top of that glass block and an observer pointing away from the glass block. Now you need temporary block next to that honey under the observer, and you place a sticky piston at the temporary block facing upwards, and on top of that piston head you place an observer so those two observers point into each other. Now you can remove the temporary block again. Here you place a building block at the back of the piston and a dropper on top. Again, it doesn't matter in which direction it's facing, it's just there to transfer the signal. Now you place an observer facing the same direction as that piston and a dispenser pointing downwards at the observer so it can place the shulker right here in front of the piston. From here you put two hoppers, one pointing into the dispenser and another one pointing into that hopper, and a comparator coming out of the first hopper you placed there so it can power the dropper. Now all you need is a hopper line for wherever you want your empty shulkers to go. Needs to be right next to that glass, and then you can just put it wherever you need your empty shulkers to be. And that is it for the double hopper speed unloader. Next I will show you how to do the quad hopper unloader. So you start by placing a temporary block and a building block right here. Then you take a dropper, facing downwards, and a second one at the building block. Now you can remove that temporary block and replace it with a Redstone Dust. Now you take your 6 hoppers and point them into the side of the droppers with one on top of each and another one on top of each dropper. Next you place a comparator on that building block, place a temporary block next to it and a building block on top and below. Now you can remove that temporary block again and replace it with a repeater pointing towards the droppers. Next you place another temporary block next to here and take an observer, one pointing its signal into the repeater, come around and place one facing the other direction at that temporary block. Now you can remove that again. You place a Redstone Torch at the block with the comparator and a sticky piston on the far side of the torch pointing downwards so it grabs that lower observer. Next you place a block on top of the torch, and next to this block we just placed we place a dropper facing upwards with a hopper on top, in which we will put one item, any item at all, as long as there's one item in there. Next I will show you how to place the minecarts on top of the hoppers. So you place 3 panes like so and a rail where you put the minecart on top. Now you push the minecart over into the glass pane, remove the rail and push the minecart all the way into the corner. Now you move away from it, remove the glass panes and make sure you no longer touch it so it actually stays in this position. Now you take some temporary blocks and go up by 4 and make a little 2x2 on top of those hoppers. Now you place 2 Glazed Terracotta here, 2 glass blocks in the back, and above those you place pistons pointing downwards at the temporary blocks we placed, like so. Now we can push those pistons and make it so that 2 glazed terracotta in front and the 2 glass in the back are locking the minecart into place. Now you can remove temporary blocks on top again and the 2 pistons again. And the minecart that distributes the items onto the 4 hoppers is locked in place. Next you place 2 honey blocks on top of the terracotta, 2 temporary blocks on top, where you place the pane right here and a rail facing the pane. Now you put a minecart here and push it all the way into the glass pane. You move away from it, remove the rail, glass pane, and then the 2 temporary blocks below so it drops onto the honey. Now you place another temporary block up here and come over. You can place pistons facing downwards and push another 2 glass blocks into this top minecart. Now your minecart is locked in place and you can remove the pistons and the temporary blocks again. After your minecarts are secured in place, you take a sticky piston and place it behind the right of your honey blocks. You place a building block next to it and 1 building block next to this dropper here. And on top of that second building block, you place the comparator reading the signal from this hopper here. Now you take a normal piston and place it on the left of the 2 glass blocks on top here. You place an observer next to that glass, pointing its signal outwards, and a temporary block beneath it. At the temporary block you place a sticky piston facing upwards, and on top of the piston head you place an observer pointing its signal inwards. So those 2 observers are pointing into each other like this. Now you can remove the temporary block again and put a building block on top of the right of the observers. Now you place a dropper on top of this building block, doesn't matter in which direction it's facing, and an observer pointing the signal in the same direction as this piston here. Now at that observer we just placed, we place a dispenser pointing downwards, which will then dispense the shulker boxes in front of the piston head. Now you place a hopper going into the top of the dispenser and a second one going into it. From here you place a comparator on top of this observer, so it's sending the signal to this dropper here. Now you come out by 2 temporary blocks like this and 1 over, and here you place a hopper line so this can catch the empty shulker, and then you can put this hopper line wherever you need your empty shulkers to end up in. And now your quad hopper unloader is done. If you want to take a closer look at these, then there's a world to unload in the video description. And if you found this to be useful redstone, then you already know what to do down below. Thanks for watching and I hope you catch the next video. Bye!